So Kevin Staton, this is Tom Ficklin from Ficklin Media. Kevin Staton will be joining us shortly. And this is our first general 30-minute discussion about Black Liberation Theology. And we're primarily focusing on James Cone. And Kevin's going to share with us information regarding James Cone. Kevin's going to lift up some of his books about James Cone. And we're going to talk about really the key question: why does theology matter in 2020? Does it matter? And even if you are an atheist
it's 6 o'clock,
or an agnostic or could care less about religion, is there something about James Cone's work? And some would consider him to be one of the more preeminent theologians of the 20th century. Is there something about his work that can inform your life, can help your life, can structure your life, can stimulate your life? So Kevin, good evening. How are you doing?
Good, Tom. How are you?
Good. I'll just give a little intro. Do you have his books, our good friend James Cone's books nearby?
Oh yeah, whole bunch.
He's going to share some of them with you. It's really a teaser today. And Kevin and I had a chance to talk offline about, I don't believe in wasting people's time, and Kevin doesn't believe in wasting people's time. And I hope I'm not wasting Kevin's time. And I say that very seriously, because my sense, Kevin, is words have been, there's such a profusion of words that's emanating through the internet sphere. In some ways, it's like, in my mind, the Tower of Babel, where literally we're at this age where it's chaotic, dystopian, just confusing to say the least. So I hope to do this on a regular basis, but we want it to be worthwhile. We want it to be worthwhile for everyone. So that's the challenge in my mind about, we don't want to waste your time, waste people's valuable time on this planet. And so I do have a big bias that the work of James Cone, at least it stimulates me. It stimulates me. So Kevin, hold up some of his books just to tease it with some of the titles so people can see who we're going to be talking about. And we hope to have various presenters as well. That's Black Theology and Black Power. That was his first episode, Kevin.
Yeah, 1969, in the aftermath of the King assassination.
Okay.
And they call it civil unrest is going on like while he's writing this book.
Mm-hmm.
So he really drives, at the time people are yelling in the streets, Black Power.
Right.
We want Black Power. And so he addresses it within the context of Black theology. I'll show the books and I'll come back to it.
Indeed.
Yeah. The other one, and we just read this. We just read Black Theology and Black Power. We had a paper on it, due on it. This is the one you and I spoke about earlier. This is the fourth book, God of the Oppressed. This is 1975, and this is more advanced. Like if you're really big into theology, because he's answering a lot of theologians that have attacked him for his stance on Black theology.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes this whole thing where you have to kind of familiarize yourself with, people like I think it's Karl Barth and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and a lot of the German theologians that a lot of theology is based on. That I'm sure you studied at Yale Divinity School.
We had papyrus back then, so it was a challenge to and cuneiform and clay tablets. So it was a little bit of a challenge, but we made it. We made it through.
I'm glad you made it, Tom. He kind of answers some folks and expounds on some things from the first book with this one, the Spiritual and the Blues. And he brings that up a lot in terms of, taking Black oppression and things that are unique only to Black oppression, like what comes out of it. So this is, the spirituals and the blues are a manifestation, because he's always talking about how you can't separate, theology or separate Jesus from Black oppression. So there is My Soul Looks Back. I think he's talking about, I haven't read this yet, but I know it goes along with in God of the Oppressed, he talks about his church experience growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know he goes like more in depth into that and all the different things that means. What I talked about in class was how, he's speaking from a church experience. I think he was born in 1938. So he's speaking of a church experience in the 40s and 50s.
Mm-hmm.
By the time it's the 60s, he's in grad school.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this isn't his latest one. I think the last book is My Soul Looks Back.
Okay.
But this is like next to last. This is The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And this also, this kind of expounds on something from God of the Oppressed. He takes off. That's why it's good to go back and read the earlier works. And I just have two other quick books that he references. He references, especially in Black theology, he references Dr. King a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And this is A Gift of Love. It's really Strength to Love is the book, but they modified it and made it more modern. But Strength to Love is a book of Dr. King's sermons. Almost every quote that they use from Dr. King, a man can't ride your back unless it's bent. Hate is too much of a burden. I've tried to go with love, decided to go with love because hate is too much. It's all, it's basically out of Strength to Love. They just went through it. And I know we talked about this one too. This is, if you're just starting out, this is a much easier read and it's really short. See how thin the book is. Jesus and the Inherited by Howard Thurman. Dr. King had this book with him when he was assassinated. He carried it with him all the time. So
Kevin, I just wanted to mention to folks that the reason it was so good for you to kind of join with us in this maiden voyage, because after teaching for still teaching over 25 years in various public school systems as a history teacher as well as a librarian, and also now Chicago Theological, working on your MDiv,
yes,
graduate of Howard University undergrad.
Yep.
And so just to have a person like you to kind of kick us off, and also you've been affiliated and involved with various churches here in Connecticut. It's really insightful for me to have you kind of be the first one that to chat. I want to jump into the quick question: why should we be? And again, when you have a belief system, this is my belief. When you have a belief system, you have blinders. So.
Right.
Meaning that you can't really see, you might be fixed in your position. But I want to push you a little bit about, you've made your commitment to why Dr. Cone and the theological quest and education is important for your life. But why should people tune in next Friday to hear more about James Cone? What is it about his work, even if you're an atheist or an agnostic, that might have some value, really literally value to you to invest your time? I believe time is literally money, in my opinion, to invest your time in tuning in.
He completely upsets the apple cart, so to use an older saying. But what he does is he really takes a lot of our notions around religion and flips them on his head, and really goes after the belief systems and indoctrinations that we've been given. For example, there's a really famous quote that a lot of people like to use with Michelle Obama, where she says, when they go low, we go high.
Mm-hmm.
And James Cone, especially in black theology, he really walks you through who the they is and who we are, what we should be. And the point he makes is that if he was alive, I think would be that Michelle Obama's value system. Michelle Obama is a woman of integrity, a woman of virtue, and a woman of just moral character is up here.
Yes.
So her low might be here. The low of the people that she's talking about, they don't have a bottom. And that's the point Dr. Cone drives home. Like, you're dealing with people that don't have a moral compass, that don't, there is no low, there's no extent that they won't go. And it shouldn't surprise you. So in modern times, once again, if you look at the whole thing with SCOTUS and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and how when Obama was president, they said, 286 days, 283 days, I think it was, before you can pick a justice, and that's the right thing to do. But now when it's you and it's 45 days away, they're like, no, we're going to pick somebody. And everybody's all surprised. But if you read Cone, you're not surprised.
And he used this term, so correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, of white supremacy throughout his writings.
Oh yeah, and he talks about this indoctrination that we have. I mean, there's so many great quotes. Like, even if you look at the Black Lives Matter movement in the book out Black Theology and Black Power, he has a quote in the last chapter where he talks about law and order can only mean injustice for Black people as long as the structure operates on the basis of racism.
And this was in 1967.
Yeah, you're sitting there, you're like, he said this back then? Like he knew right away that, and then if you're looking at now, he talks about how if there's no real structural change, he said this, talked about the civil rights movement. And he said they got some laws passed. He said, but the difference is protest is we're trying to change the system.
Mm-hmm.
Revolution is we're going to get rid of the system and replace it with something else.
And Kevin, help me to focus though, and I really appreciate what you just shared in terms of Black theology. A secular person might say who's never heard of James Cone's, his name, or certainly not aware of any of his titles, that what you've just mentioned in terms of analyzing the current political landscape is just common knowledge. We know we're in an oppressive state. Why should we spend another various Fridays in terms of focusing on James in terms of the Black liberation angle? What does that bring in addition to what we hear easily now in the current common discussion?
One of the things that he does that's so important is he makes sure that we understand the social and political aspects of liberation. So in other words, and the double standard that exists. I'll give you an example. How you'll have churches, especially African-American churches, and they're told, focus on heaven and focus on by and by, we'll get there. Don't get involved in politics. And he's like, it's a complete contradiction, because look at the moral majority in the 80s and look at evangelicals now. So these white churches are extremely political.
Mm-hmm.
And he walks you through not just our belief system and the distorted, colonized, imperialist, theological and religious views that we have, but he walks you through their views.
Okay.
And what they believe. And it's like it's a window into how evangelicals will justify. These people had Donald Trump signing their Bibles. I said, he didn't write it. He's not the author. But what Cone does, he talks about how in their eyes, he is. He's a beacon of white supremacy. He is.
And for this study group, again, God, redemption, forgiveness, theology. Just the word theology has certain connotations, and I want to kind of still drill down with you on why it's important for an atheist or an agnostic to kind of tune in next Friday at 6.
If you didn't believe in anything, when he talks about reconciliation, he talks about it in just, there's so many things that he talks about just are from the human condition. So he doesn't do all that metaphysical, transcendent, abstract things that we really associate with religion and theology. It's right down the pipe. So I'll give you an example.
Okay.
Another example. So he's talking about reconciliation. And he's talking about, reconciliation can't be on the terms of the person who wronged you. which in many instances, that's what we're taught. So think about it. If say, all right, you're an atheist, you don't believe anything. Say somebody does something to you, and then they're like, oh, well, that's in the past. That was a long time ago. You should get over it. Well, it wasn't done to you. It was done to me. Like, it's like somebody says, let bygones be bygones. And it's like, I didn't mistreat you. You mistreated me. So it's easy for you to say, let bygones be bygones, because you weren't hurt. You weren't mistreated. There's only one side to this. If I did something to you as well, then okay, you have a point. But he makes that point in terms of the oppressor and the oppressed.
15.
Give me, refer if you can to just maybe one of your favorite passages among the many that you have some of the books there.
Oh my gosh.
Just turn to any page. And
let me tell you, whew, this, hold on, I get, in the first book, Black Theology, Black Power, there's so much fire in that book. Oh, okay. Chapter 4, where he talks about the Black church. I love this because this is something Black churches do right now all the time. So he talks about how victims are trained to accept the values of their oppressor. And once you accept your oppressor's value system, you minimize the injustices that you're suffering here and now, because you're looking at your oppressor has you focused on, oh, there's going to be a kingdom for you later. So, Tom, how many churches do you know that have the word kingdom in it? Yeah. That's all they talk about. We're kingdom building. We're kingdom building. And I'm like, yo, if 80% of your population is in poverty in your congregation, you need to do something about that now. And that's what he keeps driving home. Like, a part of God's Jesus would be considered a revolutionary.
And that's where the word liberation, the connotation
right.
of the word liberation comes.
He didn't, if somebody was sick and needed to be healed, Jesus didn't have like a theological discussion with them about the nature of their sickness and the metaphysics behind it. He healed them. That's it. If the 5,000 that were fed, he didn't come out there and give a lecture about, this transcendent nature of hunger. There was no, he fed them. So James Cone is like, when these problems arise around, the prison industrial complex or redlining or voter suppression, you deal with it. You confront it. You don't sit there and, start singing by and by when the morning comes. No, morning's right now. And that chapter, like I just sat there going, wow, because I see so much of this all the time. We're building kingdom building. We're all about kingdom. We don't do church, we do kingdom. What do you say?
Shift to me slightly again, and going through various topics, maybe just to illustrate when we talk in future sessions, and we'll have other presenters as well, that we want to look at the various dimensions of how people perceive reality. So what do I mean? Why is it important for you that, what can a person that believes in Black liberation theology do if a person does not believe or even doesn't even know about Black liberation theology? If you're a Christian, can a non-Christian be just as successful or efficacious as a Christian in terms of social improvement, social gospel ministry? Well, not really ministry, but humanitarian efforts. Why does the Christian belief, why is that is that a prerequisite to be a better person, in your opinion?
Well, what he keeps driving the point home is he's saying that basically Jesus is Black liberation. And he says it over and over again. He says, because of the way Christ was treated, he directly identifies with oppression, and that oppressed people, use that as an example, use that faith as an example to fight. But see, the thing he drives home is to fight oppression, not accept it. He's saying that you use it to fight oppression. So for a secular person, of course, everyone can do their part. I think it's interesting because Black theology, I have a 1989 version. And in the foreword, he talks about all the things that he didn't know back then, that he grew in. So, issues around sexism and, there's a whole, and he gives a lot of credit to the womanist theologians that come out and deal with issues around women's, disenfranchisement that weren't touched on in this book. The first book, and in later books he does. He corrects that. But for a secular person, there's an inclusive nature to everything that you can do. Everyone can do their part to fight oppression. But for him, he's basically like, there's a direct connection between Jesus Christ and the teachings and the life of Jesus Christ and the life we're supposed to live here on earth in terms of fighting against oppression.
So
draws a direct line.
This might be too personal to ask you, but I think you can understand why I keep on pressing you on this point. You've alluded to prior to this public discussion about your conversion experience,
right?
And you're not the only one in the world that who identified. I'm
right. Oh yeah.
I'm laughing. So relate your conversion experience in terms of that belief system and that anchoring to Cone's work in terms of how that kind of influences your daily walk.
When he talks about, in the chapter that I love so much about the Black church, there's a statement that he makes where he says the Black church, the way that the white community would treat the Black church was like an investment for maintaining a caste system within the Black community. And for me, getting called into the ministry, that was how I felt. I didn't want anything to do with it. Still a little shaky, but I didn't want anything, because I see, if you and I was right here in New Haven as a child.
You thought to be a second class citizen status. Unpack that statement a little bit.
Yeah, it was basically they replaced we have a divinely appointed task for proclaiming freedom and equality, and we replaced it and abandoned it to basically maintain white oppression in our communities. So I've said this before, where, we once were freedom and equality. It was freedom and equality and praise and worship. We did both. That was the civil rights movement. Now, you see this whole separation where, that's why you have a Black Lives Matter movement. You didn't, when the church was out there, you didn't need it because it was us doing it. And I'll give you a prime example. Kirk Franklin, the famous gospel singer, used to go on TBN. TBN is like the Christian Broadcast Network. That's like, that's like for Black folks, BET of Christian, right. If you get on that, you get all the airplay, all this. But after Tatiana Jefferson was murdered in her home playing video games with her nephew in Fort Worth, Texas, where he's from, he spoke out about it and told him he wasn't, I'm not going back on there, because he wanted to talk about it. They didn't want him to talk about it. And he was like, all right then. And it's that whole thing, that conversion experience where you look at what's happening in your community. And, like I said in my initial sermon, I said I didn't want to be a minister, a preacher, because I viewed them I viewed them as hustlers. I didn't feel like they were.
You're still loyal to this general institution.
Right. Say that again, Tom.
You still are loyal to this general institution. So,
the thing is, and it gets back into Cone's work. The thing is that when you stop letting your oppressor define something as powerful as your faith, and that's what I said. I stopped being religious. I became a person of faith. I'm not religious anymore because it was saturated with white supremacy. I tell people all the time, it was saturated with patriarchy and misogyny and homophobia. It's saturated with that stuff. It's overflowing. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to focus on this faith thing. That's a big thing that pushed me into seminary, is learning about Jesus's teachings, and then all these other perspectives around the world. There's I just had a New Testament class, and we had a book called it's Daniel Pat. It's called a global commentary. It's phenomenal. If you give me 30 seconds, it's right behind me. Or
okay, sure, please.
Grab it. All right. Got it right here. Got both of them. There we go. There we go. Oh.
You're in shape. You're in shape. That's good to see.
Yep. So this is Global Bible Commentary by Daniel Pat. He's the editor. He didn't write it. But this book is, they take biblical passages from every book of the Bible and they connect it to people around the Christian theologians all over the world. So there's a section we had to read. There's Jesus from an African perspective. There's Jesus from an Asian perspective. There's Jesus from a feminist perspective. There's Jesus from a Latin American perspective. There's Jesus from an Orthodox perspective. I mean, it's just, there's so much breadth. I mean, from the African perspective, they talk about the nurturing aspect of Christ and midwives. And I think they're dealing in Western Africa. It's just a perspective that, and even with this one, this is a women's Bible commentary. Carol Newsom and Sharon Renge, and I'll send you this stuff, Tom. But once again, every book of the Bible, every single book, and it deals with the role of women from a feminist or a womanist scholar.
But connect
that in church.
Connect the two books that you've just mentioned with James Cone and Black Liberation Theology. This
expands because what you're doing is you're dealing with all these oppressed groups. So you're dealing with the sexism, the patriarchy, and the misogynism that women have to deal with. And with the global one, I mean, they connect to everybody's struggle, whether the struggles in North Korea, whether it's a struggle in Peru or Brazil, all over the world. I mean, and there's scholars from all over the world, and they're talking about what Christ means to them. And once again, this goes back to Cone. Cone, talks about, especially in his later work, that's why he switches from, he doesn't just say God of Black folks. Now he expands it out to God of the oppressed. Because he's expanded his thinking and he's interacted with scholars from all over the world who are dealing with different forms of oppression. I mean, Tom, I was in West Africa last year, and I came home and I turned on my faucet and I had tears in my eyes because for 11 days, I didn't have access to like water I could just turn on and drink. And that's most of the world.
But connect, and I appreciate your sharing that personal anecdote. Connect though how Cone differs from the Black Panthers 7-point plan, or from Henry Highland Garnett, or from Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz.
He references Garnett and Malcolm X a lot.
Okay.
But his biggest thing is his central figure is still Jesus Christ.
And so elaborate on
as a
that.
Christian. Yeah, he's not going to, he doesn't back off of that.
Mm-hmm.
But what he does is he takes that notion, that concept, and he basically views in God of the Oppressed, he's talking about Jesus is a personal story of God's will to liberate the oppressed. So it's always, he basically views Jesus as, not just the historical Jesus, but he's like, Jesus is with us right now in our struggle for freedom. Like he's right with us. So that's the biggest difference. Jesus is still the centerpiece.
And how does that connect with your MDiv
It's
studies?
6:30.
You're investing your personal time in getting the MDiv, and you've already been involved in churches, assistant minister at various places. How does what you've just mentioned connect with your particular path as you see yourself treading?
I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Cone a year before he died, and he was at Union. And I sat down with him and I talked about the nature of my research. And he actually gave me some advice.
Mm-hmm.
He walked me through he said, this is what you need to read. And these are the areas you need to focus in. And what it means to me is it has expanded my thinking, and you're not in this ministry box where you feel like, all right, I have to be a pastor of a church. I don't want anything to do with it. I'm with that. I'm definitely more on the academic side. I get it if somebody's called to be that and to lead. I fully understand and support that. But some of us are, teachers, and some of us are lay people. Some of us do the phenomenal ministry work. Like I said, Reverend Benita Grubbs,
Mm-hmm.
who, I tell people she's right. She's local. And all of these things in action about doing the work of Jesus Christ for the oppressed and the disenfranchised. She's done that her whole life.
But you believe that Benita is only as successful as she is because of her faith claim, or could she be as committed as the various food?
I could tell you from her. I asked.
Okay.
Oh, it's her faith. That's the driving force, and that's, once again, like I said, when you become a person of faith, you're just going to do it. Like, religious people spend a lot of time judging, and that's what pushes the atheists and the agnostics away. Where, my faith causes me to be respectful if somebody's a Buddhist, if they're a Muslim, if they're Confucian, they follow Confucius, if they're agnostic, whatever you are. If we're about the work, then it's just about getting the work done. I don't, because you're not going to change what I believe.
And as we conclude, I want you to reference the books again, because again, we're going to kind of reconvene next Friday at 6, and I have a few people in mind to present, but I want you to kind of listen in as well, because I still believe that, and the way you might use the term believe and I might use the term believe might be different, but I think we're on one accord that there's something about communing with one another that can help to order our steps daily. So just reference a few of the books again, and again, we have the Facebook page that we've just started, and we'll invite people to that, and we'll send out the Zoom link for next Friday at 6 as well.
Okay. Well, this is his first book, Black Theology and Black Power. So this is the first book out the gate. But like I said, depending on your palate, if you're like not a theologian, Howard Thurman is much more like, is mystical. It's very.
Give us a quote. Give us a quote from Howard Thurman if you like. We have a few more minutes.
Oh gosh, hold on. Let me go. I highlighted something. he basically says that you have to be able to endure the terrible pressures of the dominating world without losing your humanity or forfeiting your soul.
Say that again.
He says you have to learn as a human being how to endure the terrible pressures of the dominating world without losing your humanity or forfeiting your soul.
Good. We're going to. Good.
It's so deep because you know what this is, and I'll show the other one.
You just stay on that point, because for me, whether it's Ginsburg or whether it's Brianna or whether it's Tamir or whether it's Yusuf Hawkins or whoever, or the various lynchings, that is kind of a dominant theme right now in 2020 about how can we maintain and nurture our sanity. And that is one of my also ulterior motives, I'll say objective motives for having these discussions, that for us to remain vigilant,
Right.
to feel committed and inspired, and to feel that we're getting some return on the investment of our time and energy. However you decide to protest, you don't want it to be just flittering in the wind or blowing smoke. So read that, just as we conclude, read that again, that passage from
Okay.
the sermon, if you would. I want to leave people with that.
Okay. Howard Thurman is from Jesus and the Disinherited. He's basically asking that human beings have to endure the terrible pressures of the dominating world without losing their humanity and without forfeiting their souls.
Good. We're going to pick up on that theme next week, and I really,
yeah, that's heavy.
Really glad you kind of mentioned that. That's the challenge. Whether you see yourself be black, white, red, green, or yellow, that's a challenge right now.
And King in Strength to Love basically carries on that, because Strength to Love is about you can't defeat your oppressor by becoming your oppressor.
Excellent.
You can't.
Kevin, thank you so much, man. Again, we just wanted to kind of do this, and
this is awesome, Tom.
And we're going to get your daughter. Your daughter's what, 14 now? How old is your daughter?
Oh gosh, almost 16. Man.
Almost 16. Not for the next show, but ask her offline. The young young folks, I would say some of the research I've read, as young as like 4 or 5 or 6, people begin to formulate their belief system about the world and reality and morals and giving. So I would love to kind of have her join in.
Oh yeah, I was an elementary school teacher. Oh yeah, 100%.
So excellent. Kevin, thank you so much, man. Enjoy your evening.
No problem, Tom. Anytime.
Really appreciate this.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
You're looking good. You're looking good.
I'm trying. So are you, Tom. I like that.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Take care.